It's not dying. Steve kind of implied that it's getting harder and harder. Sherman's obviously making it work. We've got lots of people here who work with private practice groups, and lots of people who have been in private practice groups. So let's just start. Is it going to die or live? We'll start with you, Rami. You said no. Is that correct?
I don't think, just yes or no.
10 years from now, yes or no?
Only yes if we have socialized medicine. If we continue where we are, no, it will not die.
Helmuth.
It'll decrease, but will still be present with those that make it work.
I think in 10 years it will not exist as it does today.
Sherman?
I think it'll be hard for new people coming out to start a private practice. But existing people, I think once you've built up in certain fields, you basically can end up switching to a cash pay model and not worry about it.
So that's a good point. So we're actually, Brigham, we'll let Brigham introduce himself. Brigham's CEO of Metasmart. So Brigham, what do you think? I mean,
I was going to say,
tell us your background and what you think and why you think that way.
So originally I was a drug rep and I left the drug industry, went to work for a company called Stryker for 13 years, and they did my own startup that does physician ancillaries. So today we do labs, pharmacies. We work with a ton of private practice, but the irony is we're working with a ton of academics that are double dipping, and just, I would say half of our portfolio are guys that are hospital employees that aren't happy with their revenue sources that they're generating from the hospital. I'm talking HCA, Methodist, across the board. So I don't think private practice will die. I think it may change for certain specialties. Like Dr. Yu was saying, there's a huge cash pay movement. There's a ton of money in cash pay. And when we look at a lot of these models, we can do it cheaper than patients are paying for their insurance or their copay or deductible. Example I can give you is telemedicine. We've launched a telemedicine platform. We can do it cheaper and employ our own MDs and do it less than the copay or deductible from a Blue Cross Blue Shield. So why would a patient waste their time if they can call in quickly, get results quick, and we ship medications direct to their house? So I think there's tons of opportunity there, but it'll definitely be a changing market.
So Brigham, when you create a model like that, one of the things we have conversations about, but I want you to speak on it publicly, is do you need the physicians when you're doing these types of models? If you're going to do a wellness model, for example, so we talked a little bit, or Stacy mentioned that, we talked about wellness. If you're going to a wellness model or functional medicine, do you need the physicians or do you not need the physicians?
No, I absolutely think we need the physicians. The challenge that I'll face is you'll meet with a physician, and by nature, physicians are very bright people, so they want to do everything themselves. So we'll meet with a physician, they'll say, well, I'll just build my own lab. Well, I'll just build my own pharmacy. But what they fail to realize is the hours and painstaking efforts that go into keeping that pharmacy alive and compliant, and the volumes. And it's the same thing with telemedicine. So I made the mistake of opening a wellness practice out towards the Woodlands and employing a doctor, and it was a nightmare. The cost of running that, the brick and mortar, the infrastructure, the MAs, all the employees, and we had a limited market that we could attract, versus telemedicine, I opened the floodgates. And I can go to doctors like yourselves and build a platform that allows you to share in a passive revenue source without managing the risk, the liability, the downside, the overhead, the cost of the infrastructure. I can't do that on my own. So that's where physicians are crucial as partners for us in these business units, is how do we work together to build something where we can share your patients, if you will, have access to your patients, and maybe open revenue streams that aren't being identified today.
Dr. Massey, what do you think? How do you think private practice is going to change?
I think it will survive. I don't think it will survive in its present form, but I think that consolidation offers opportunities for excellence, and I think that's where you ought to concentrate.
Consolidation how?
In group practice.
In group practices?
Yeah. Whenever industry consolidates, there's always an opportunity for innovation. Excellent.
Heather, so you've obviously dealt with a lot of different practices and a lot of different models. What do you think of private practice?
Well, I agree with Dr. Massey that
Pull your mic to you so we can hear you.
I doubt the business model of private practice will be sustainable in its current form, but I don't believe it's going to change so quickly that there's not time for transition to For example, hybrid practice models that leverage concierge medicine and have contracting scenarios that are based on value-based reimbursement. So I don't think there's any reason to believe anything is dire, but it will be in a state of continuous change and transition probably for the next decade as those dynamics are playing out.
So guys, outside of your physician reimbursement, what's the best revenue stream that you have coming into your practice? Sherman, we'll start with you. What's your best revenue stream outside of your physician reimbursement? And if you had to forecast 5 years from now, what do you think will be your best revenue stream outside of physician reimbursement?
I think right now, well, for us right now, we're fortunate to get in with some pathology and histopathology with a big group of GI docs, and that's grown to like 70, 80 partners in this. It's doing really well because part of it was they had a network thing, which was doing well for a while, and as we talked about, that's becoming much more difficult to do. But that still continues to generate, just passive income, probably $10,000 a month for doing nothing except submitting our pathology specimens to this company, which you're going to submit it to someone anyways. And someone talked about earlier, we generate the patients, right? Anesthesia, radiology, pathology, these are all just leeches in a sense off of our patients, right? I don't want to necessarily use that word, but that's the easiest one I can think of. But, so that's going to continue to do well. But I still think the ability to invest in different ancillary services is going to continue to do well if you're going to survive in private practice. So facility fees are still, the largest reimbursement because doctors have the poorest lobbyists. Insurance companies have the best lobbyists, and then hospitals are probably in the second best. So,
do you see in the owning a financial stake in a hospital or a surgery center? Do you see that surviving?
I think so, and there's different models that are out there now, management company models, things like that you may not necessarily have to invest directly into the facility. So you don't have to invest in the brick and mortar, but you can invest in the income stream as part of a management company. I'm not involved in that, but I hear of those models out there that we're looking into. So.
Rami, do you have any type of ownership stake in any type of building or?
Yeah, I'm not very smart. That's the problem. I looked at these things and they're too complicated. I have ADHD and they show me the contracts. What I do, just the EGD model that I put is this is kind of what we do. Really, Eric, the only source of income I have is billing. But we have very, very good management in the office. But I agree. Obviously, Rachel probably can speak to that. This is great revenue. But just, you got to be careful. If you're in certain places like Cook County, Cook County is very, very tricky with this whole certificate of need, with revenue sharing. There are so many laws that you'll get in trouble without you knowing, even if you think you're doing everything right.
How many people are in a certificate of need state? Yeah, tough environment certificate of need where you have to document that an institution has justification for being built. I don't even know how that's really kind of legal, but from a constitutional standpoint.
Well, Eric, I'm just going to jump in because I'm the guy who owns the building. Mm-hmm. And pays attention to all the little stuff. And I'm in a tough state. California is not known for doling out great contracted rates. And out-of-network died. It literally killed our outpatient surgery center business. But, how many people know all the S-Corp stuff and how it affects you? And basically the law's changed. So now we have a change where S-Corps are going to get a deduction from 35% pass-through income to 20% pass-through income, unless you're a physician, because medical practices are excluded and you stay at 35%. So I hear that. Yeah, no, it's true. So my practice, I made the big mistake of letting my practice own the building. So now I have to change my medical practice, which is Ventura Advanced Surgical Associates, to Ventura Advanced Surgical Associates 1, and I have to create a new one that's Ventura Advanced Surgical Associates 2, which is going to get all the medical practice business. The old one turns into a real estate company that owns the building. My new practice, number 2, pays rent to the old practice, number 1, which is now no longer a medical S-Corp, it's just a standard S-Corp. All the pass-through income is now at 20% through that, and I get a deduction on the rent because that's a business overhead. And that all went into effect. I called the attorney 5 minutes after I read the new tax law and said, okay, we're doing all this. My accountant said it doesn't pass the look test. And I went, well, you're wrong. And secondly, I said, so if I quit practicing medicine right now, you're going to have me pay 35% pass-through income for the rest of my life. So you have to constantly stay on top of these things, because the only thing that will send me into depression, where I won't, I'll probably be catatonic, is going to be if I didn't do that and I discover it 10 years from now. So it's a huge pain. My office is going, we have to re-sign all those contracts. And if someone pays my old business, I have to back it out, and then I have to 1099 it to the new one. But in the end, when you're talking about $200,000 to $300,000 in mortgage payments coming through you as pass-through income, 15% drop from 35 to 20 is a lot of money.
What forecast, before you hand the mic over, because I'm going to have Steve do the same thing. What do you think? Do you have any revenue enhancement models in your practice other than real estate?
The one that makes the most money is cardiopulmonary exercise stress testing, which is on everyone and is easy, and the staff. There's no.
You own every aspect of that, and that's your biggest. That's your biggest revenue stream outside of physician reimbursement.
That's the biggest, easiest, no cost. Now the sleep lab makes the most money, but it has high overhead associated with that.
So what do you think? What's it going to be in 10 years?
It's going to be simple things like, we're building a physical therapy department upstairs. We have the room, we have the space, PT, bariatrics requires you do exercise, and and people like coming to PT, so I can probably make $600,000 a year with 50% overhead for the cost of the therapist and bring $300,000 home, just on stuff the insurance companies require me to do. And the total investment, because I own the space, is about $20,000 in equipment, and probably the cost of learning how to do it, and some trips and stuff like that. And where do you go for help? I go to my orthopedic surgeon friends, because they all have physical therapy departments. There's lots of little models there. You look at nickels and dimes, and you look at how the insurance companies make you do stuff. So I'm the last guy in the United States that wants a 3- and 6-month medically supervised weight management program to disappear. I love it, because one, I don't have to worry about getting someone through quickly, so they can do the sleep test, they can see the pulmonologist, they can go to PT twice a week for 6 months, and it's low-hanging fruit. The insurance company doesn't fight against that. So
it's like what Rami said, you took something's potential cost and turned it into a profit center.
Can you, I'm sorry, because this came up, the business course, can you explain to people what do you mean by cardiac testing as almost free, sleep lab has higher overhead? Because this is what people don't understand.
So anytime you want to do a revenue stream, you have to look at what the Achilles heel is for it. So when I started sleep, we never sleep studied everybody, but we sleep studied almost everybody. And then the insurance companies came by and said, no, you have to meet certain criteria. So they made us do home studies, which now increased the cost, because those little home tests wouldn't get returned, and then we'd have a more increased cost of providing those. And then we had a sleep tech, and the sleep tech is not somebody that you can just go and hire. They're not, where do you go to get a sleep tech? One of ours had a change in his life. He had to leave from doing night work to day work, couldn't have him anymore. Lab shut down for 3.5 months. We finally looked on Craigslist, of all things, and found 2 in LA that wanted to drive up and come to our area. So you have these Achilles heels. Now when you do cardiac exercise stress testing, it's kind of like, imagine Greg LeMond on a bicycle with a ventilator on his mask on his face. It measures cardiac and pulmonary function. My pulmonologist is already on staff. The techs are basically MAs that are well trained. They're already there for the day. And we can fit all of these studies in. If he's doing 48 cases a month, I got 48 studies a month, and they're paying us $900 a study with really no extra overhead. Just put it in a room that I already own, and it's generating sometimes more money than I make doing a sleeve gastrectomy. And the test is 15 minutes long.
So treatment services versus, well, let me let Steve go, and then I'll ask him more questions. Sorry.
The one thing that I do think where private practice could potentially make a big comeback was that comment that was made about convenience. I do think that there are going to be opportunities where we can improve the convenience for patients, and I think that's easier to do by individual practitioners or small private practice groups. And if they can, and because of the way technology is advancing, it's going to gives us more power in smaller packages and with less cost. I do think that there will be a surge actually in that for a period of time until, the larger corporations and people and figure out, okay, this is how we have to do this. But But I do think that there's a great opportunity there in that world.
So Brigham, Bill, functional medicine. I mean, do you think this is like the opportunity for private practice to engage as far as defining the new normal? Because normal values are very broad, and basically to have an abnormal lab value, for example, you got to be super sick, basically, to fit within that abnormal range. And should we be tightening up the normals and focusing on optimal health as opposed to some vague normal health? And will that be attractive, and can it make money?
I think it can. I know we use a lot of thought leaders like Dr. Massey. Larry Lipschultz in Houston is a big name urologist. We use him a lot to consult with. And he talks about lab results are a component. It's also, are you showing signs of this disease state? So maybe you come back and you have low testosterone, or your testosterone's 350, but if you have poor sexual performance, you're tired, you're sleepy, you're all these things, well, you're symptomatic. So 300 may be low for you. And so these thought leaders are saying we optimize individuals. We try to practice preventative medicine to keep these patients healthier longer. And so with their guidance, what we do is we treat. But the beauty of treating is if a patient's on hormones, by law, we have to do their blood work every quarter. So we took a patient in a bariatric practice, for instance. I was talking to Dr. Wilson about this. If we were to roll out a health and wellness program where we implemented hormone testing prior to surgery to identify, is there a hormonal inadequacy or some sort of underlying root cause that's not being diagnosed? And most bariatric surgeons I've met with right now don't do blood work in depth. Even though you're doing vitamins and supplements and all these other things, you're not actually doing the blood work to say, what is the hormonal balances? What are the vitamin deficiencies? That blood test reimburses astronomical amounts of money. And then now if we treat that patient, if there is a hormonal inadequacy, they come in 4 times a year for their blood work, and it's reimbursed by the insurance carriers. So you take a patient from a one-time hit to 4 times a year. And that's kind of what we've done in orthopedic practices. If you talk to those guys about how do we turn the goose eggs into golden gooses? How do we take your non-surgical patients, these patients that you lose money on every day, and turn them into revenue generators? And there's tons of ways to do that that make the patient happy. They feel like they're having their needs addressed. The doctor's hearing them. It's crazy to think that people leave the surgeon's office pissed off when they don't get surgery. It's insanity, but they do. They go see an orthopod and they're like, are you kidding me? I don't need a shoulder surgery? So we have a ton of different, ways that we partner with practices to help them make that patient happy and treat that patient and turn it into a revenue source.
It's hard to turn a big battleship around, but it's easy to turn a ski boat around. And so when I look at private practice versus behemoths, I think that you have an opportunity to, just like he said, you're looking at the tax laws that come out. You have an opportunity to take advantage of those things. You have an opportunity to add things, which is much harder for bigger organizations to do. I think that also the turn towards personalized medicine, of course you're going to hear that from me, right? Also offers a lot of opportunities. Me personally, I go to a concierge medicine group. You'll never see me in a doctor's office other than if something catastrophic happens to me, because I can pay $250 a month and I can get I'm looking at optimal health care, not sick care. If I get sick, I'll go to the hospital. If I want to stay healthy, I'll go to someone who's invested in my health, not invested in my insurance company, but invested in my health. And I think those sorts of opportunities are real opportunities for private practice.
So you've developed an algorithm basically to do some in-depth analysis, specifically around pharmacogenetics.
Yeah.
For functional medicine really to take off, and Heather, you can come in on this one, you're going to have to do lots more algorithmic development and lots more data analysis. We're going to have to have a lot more clinical research too, correct?
That's correct. But just like Dr. Scott said, technology is becoming cheaper and cheaper and more powerful and more powerful. So if you adopt these things and you do it smart, you don't, Dr. Lefty said, don't invest when you pay for something, think of it as a return on investment. But if you invest in these things and you do them, I think you have a real chance to excel. I don't think that you can stay small and private and not embrace an excellence model.
Excellent points. And I think with respect to the adoption of technology, we're getting closer and closer to real-world evidence at scale that can actually be trusted in the context of reimbursement scenarios that have just been out of reach today. Meanwhile, that's coming together with our public health authorities increasingly taking seriously the patient population who receives very little health care, only receives emergent care. I think something to think about in the future trajectory of private practice is that it has generally been oriented around trying to avoid public payers as much as possible because of some of the economics that other speakers highlighted today. I think that a mind shift is important for private practitioners to take into consideration, thinking maybe 5 years out, that there's going to be alternative payment models in place increasingly that that will end what has effectively been rationing of care for especially the Medicaid population. And that opens up an enormous new population of patients who have effectively been receiving no meaningful health care. And that is a huge growth opportunity by comparison to the standard population demography that you're dealing with today. So imagine a world where using technology innovations and being on the edge of the curve with value-based reimbursement, you could provide access to huge populations receiving no care today. So
no care right now, but they will be publicly funded or privately funded?
I'm actually speaking about publicly funded models that right now are just nickels and dimes.
So how do we balance that with all the regulation that gets attached to those publicly funded patients?
So I don't think you're able to avoid the regulation, and to participate in those models, you'll need to be sharing data in regulated and consistent manners. And the downside there will be a needed investment in technology infrastructure and an orientation around continuous advancement of your technology infrastructure, as opposed to believing you can sort of remain in stasis.
So this graph up here, a lot of you have seen, I'm sure. This is since 1970, basically, how the healthcare dollars have grown between physicians and administrators. So obviously, we're getting not an increasing percentage of the pie. Are we ever going to, so I want to go back to physician reimbursement or surgical reimbursement specifically, because our salaries are not, specifically in the classic model of how we're supposed to make money. They're not really going up. Does this ever change? Or is anything change with this? Or are we going to continue to have this process? Rami?
We're just going to work more and find ways around it. I don't think it's going to change. It's going to get worse.
Say 20, 30 years from now, still going to be an issue. Is something going to disrupt all this and change it? Do you think anything will change, or
it's just this is why when you asked me yes or no, I said unless we go to socialized medicine. But I think if we stay like this, it's going to fall apart. We're heading to either complete fall apart or we're going to go to socialized medicine. Because not everyone can be smart like Helmut or Sherman, can do this thing. Most, over 90% of people is going to go bill for a lab chole and go home. So they need to do more lab choles. This will continue. I don't think this is going to get better for us.
I think it changes, and I'm optimistic it will. What I observe in healthcare is that we're sort of the stable cost. We've cost the same. We're not the big cost center. You get the picture completely, and the expense is overwhelming. But there is so much industry that makes money off of the work we do. And it really became clear to me, and my son was in Portugal over the summer, and he got food poisoning. So I go on to WhatsApp, and then with my friends from Portugal, where do I send him? He goes to the hospital, he gets hydrated, he gets labs, he asks out the nurse, who says no. He gets discharged. €1 charge to access it, gets a bill sent to him in the US for 75 euros. That is just a huge difference over what it would cost in the United States. And those costs are eventually going to be looked at. There's too many people making money because we work. And they need us. They need us forever. They can only squeeze so far. And when you've squeezed us down to where everyone's employed, or the private practice guys are just the plastic surgeons and those of us that are on cash-based models, then something else happens. And I notice the administrators starting to change. We have one less at all of our hospitals now.
Helmut, I love you, and I quoted you so many times because you're very smart, but I disagree with you. How is it going to change if none of how many people here donate regularly to any entity, American Medical Association, American College of Surgeons, ASMBS? We have to have a voice. And today, most people don't agree with the AMA, some people ACS, but I think unless something changes in us, nothing will change. Nothing will change by us talking like.
Well, I'll tell you what's already changed. Drug reps, they don't come to my office anymore. The medicine reps are gone. They've invested their money in direct to consumer, probably because the return on investment is better. Things are slowly changing with the people in yellow, and eventually, when they can't change anymore, where do they go to change it? They're not going to pay the implant rep to stand there anymore. My stapling rep went from being the highest paid because of the bonus structure she got to she left the company because she's just on straight salary.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe y'all are saying the same thing, though, because what you could be saying is our reimbursement doesn't get better. It's just all that other stuff, the yellow gets worse. And Rami, you may be saying the same thing. Exactly, but should what does both? I mean, okay, so maybe it's inevitable that the yellow gets smaller as a percentage, but how do we actually get the red or maroon to actually grow to any significant degree? Because we don't organize together, right? And
that's the point.
Steve, you made a comment. You said you think that we will. You think that we will organize in your talk. I think you said that we will organize together better. Why? How? Why and how?
Because that model is out there that shows that it's advantageous, and so I think people are going to be forced into that, and I think it's going to come in a lot of different forms, and it's going to come, on almost an individual basis. But I do think that is going to happen, from that point of view, and there are more and more people that are getting smarter about that. Yeah, I do. Both. I actually think the model of specialties is going to change from that point of view, both clinically and from a financial and practice point of view. So
then what do you tell Dr. Brian Duncan when he says, the RVU, when you go to just us, forget about politician, if no more than 10% of people will answer an RVU question, I think it will never. I've gone to DC for lobbying many times with different organizations. These people look at us that we make so much money, So unless you look at the PAC, Political Action Committee, that John Morton put together for ASMBS, no one is donating, So unless this is what politics in America, money talks. Unless we organize, unless we start having the mentality of the trial lawyers, nothing will change. No one cares about saving lives. The only reason they care about saving lives is when those models that the ladies talked about generate money if people live longer. Otherwise, no one has incentive to save lives. This is the business part.
Sherman, where are you side? You more positive like Steve and Helmuth or negative like Rami?
Well, actually, I have an interesting story I heard from one of the anesthesiologists, which kind of ties a little bit, I think, to where things get squeezed more and more, and I think the insurance companies will ultimately have to come around. So one of the anesthesia groups here were telling me that in Houston, in order for them to continue to get reimbursed at a decent amount, percentage of Medicare, whatever, the small groups keep getting pushed down more and more, so they have to join a big group. So the big groups they partner and they join to form a bigger group, so they get a bigger payment. At some point, you have one large group that controls everything, physicians, and this is a specialty group since all anesthesiologists, they're getting paid the most, but then at some point now they're going to have all the control. So I think there is some truth to this thing's getting squeezed more and more.
They're getting bigger and they're getting more money, but is it always filtering back to the provider, right?
Well, this is an anesthesia group.
Or is it going in the yellow, right?
Yeah. So I think there is a breaking point to where it will come back around, and I'm optimistic as well that physicians will see some reimbursements or other sources of revenue that'll help kind of make ends meet.
Comments? Heather, you comment?
Just a lot of the dialogue presumes that the variation from the high to the low compensation range for different specialties is going to remain consistent. I think one thing that and this is just a prediction, we're probably going to see a wider range of compensation on individual bases based on outcomes and the way that those compensation structures get organized, and the way that counterparties are able to protect their rights and interests in those relationships is going to be very interesting. But I predict that there's going to be a wider range in average in compensation.
Do we have to drop? So I mean, Helmuth said that the out of network model is virtually dead in California. Is the out of network model going to be dead all over? We keep saying that. I mean, I told Sherman, because Sherman's like, I'm going to go out of network, and I was like, well, good luck with that. It's going to be dead in 3 years. It's still there in Texas.
Not in Illinois.
I think there's just a fundamental difference in state by state philosophy. I'm jealous of Texas. I wish I'd moved to Austin in 1997. Whole life would be different in terms of money. And I think Arizona has different philosophies. I think Washington State, all of those are a little more favorable, and for reasons we don't understand in other states. I don't know why Texas is a model of treating physicians generally better than in other states. I think as we see outmigration in California, which is happening in huge numbers of companies leaving, Austin has stolen so many major corporations. I think then the model changes a little bit in California.
What about public payers? I mean, they haven't made. I mean, they finally fixed all the sustainable growth rate crap, but it's still not that much money, right? So, do we need to start dropping Medicare? I don't take Medicare. Do we need to start dropping it?
I think there's a very strong strategy with that. Like when you drop it in the little tiny area that I work, I get a better Medicaid rate than I get out of Medicare now. And I was assuming that Medicaid was so bad that I should never talk to them. I talked to them, and they basically handed me a contract that I was scared to negotiate better because it was way better than I was going to sign for. And I think it's going to depend on specialty, and it's going to depend on physician populations that are available to do the work.
On the other hand, we contracted with County Care, which is in Illinois, if you are too rich to qualify for Medicaid, then you get County Care. And we actually did have a contract with them for 120% of Medicaid. It's been 16 months, we haven't gotten paid. I have to be in network because I'm chairman of surgery at the Inner City Safety Net Hospital. But we're working with our CEO to try to get some payment, because only the chairman of different department, because we get paid for leadership, take that. But it's been over a year. So all these things, Eric, at some point they're gonna explode.
Okay, so just to wrap up, let's just go down the row and everyone kind of give me an opinion of 10 years, because we're trying to talk about the future. 10 years from now, what do you think is going to be the biggest change in your practice? It can be anything. And for the folks that support practices, y'all can talk about it in general. Heather, what'll be the biggest difference in 10 years for people in practice who do surgery?
I think that that more of your compensation will be at risk based on outcomes measures, and less committed based on work volume, and that will shift based on your proportion of public and private and self-pay.
I think the biggest change is going to be in our whole medical system. I think we'll actually move to something similar to what Australia has, where you have basic health care guaranteed to pretty much everybody. It's going to be crappy. You won't want it. But anybody else will end up getting additional insurance policies that cover things that aren't covered under the national program. I love economics, and I think administrators add no value to the equation. I still think medicine is an art. I can do all the algorithms in the world, but it doesn't compensate for someone's judgment. So I think that some things will change and some things won't. And I think that it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for people who are real innovators to go in there and create their own change, essentially.
Brigham?
I agree with that. I think it's going to go more towards personalized medicine, cash pay solutions for everyday medicine, unless it's something chronic or a major disease state that requires a hospital. I think the people who can afford it are going to get out of the system in 10 years if the system doesn't change. And I do think the yellow and the black will both go down. I do think there's not a lot of fat left on the bone to squeeze from physicians, but seeing what they've done with primary care, I can't fathom that they wouldn't try to pull the same antics in surgical market. The industry's dead. Like, industry people are dying on the vine. Those reimbursements that go down at the hospital mean hospitals spend less on joints, implants, products, innovation, which means industry will take a hit, and those guys have already seen those hits, and they're going to get worse. So,
actually, I really agree with Heather and Dr. Massey. Is that I think having good outcomes, you're going to draw in your patient. You're drawing the patients. But what you're going to have to do is, instead of before, when we first started, when we had good out-of-network payments, we always talked about working smarter, not necessarily harder, right? So if you get paid 5 to 6 times more per case, you didn't have to do as many patients. But you're going to have to grow into, I think, larger groups, multi-specialty groups, to be able to compete and then drive, better reimbursements. And, that's going to come back to the main people who have good outcomes. And then when they implement nationalized medicine, you are going to have the secondary payers, and the patients with that secondary insurance are going to come look for the best doctors to take care of them.
First of all, in 10 years, I hope to be retired. That's number one. But I will tell you, and I have no idea where it's going to go from that point of view. What I do see, though, is that, people, in and out of networks and all these types of things. But then we, and I mean, this as well as anybody, Eric, you get those cases that nobody else wants to do. I mean, this is, one of the sources for me of patients is sent to me actually by insurance companies. It says basically, well, nobody else in our network will see this patient, take care of this patient, do this operation, but they feel that it's necessary. And I do wonder what is going to happen in those types of situations. What is going to happen to those outlier patients? And that's something. And you talk about outcomes, but if you're one of those people who take those patients, man, that kills your outcomes in so many ways. But at the same time, I wonder what's going to happen to those types of patients. They're really
very good question. Yeah.
I think in my situation, we'll be contracted with everyone, and we will have formed very close relationships or even partnerships with major multi-specialty groups like UCLA Medical Group, Cedars. We live in a location where they want to get the patients and they want them taken care of locally, and we'll develop the ability to give them what they want, and they'll refer us more patients to sort of secure the minimum number we need to be profitable.
I think just what everyone said, Eric, it's going to be some sort of nationalized, socialized medicine with people who are very good, being able to have little private practice niche on the side who are very, very good. But I will tell to Heather just one little thing. That was an issue in our last business course, Obesity Week. Speaking of outcome, when people say, pay for performance, this really never worked the way they said, because Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee took from MBSA QIP the data for the Tennessee surgeon, and then they went ahead and got rid of the bottom 10% performers. So people who had good outcome stayed in practice. People the worst outcome just basically went broke. But people with good outcome didn't make more money. So it's very, very dangerous when we talk about pay for performance, because you're not going to get a bonus for performing well. But if they get you, like Dr. Scott was saying, to do higher risk cases, you may be out of that loop. So it's very dangerous when we support it. We just have to be very careful what we support.
So great panel. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for participating. We'll wrap up now. Again, dinner's at 6:30. Drinks, and it's in the Monet room, which is just upstairs. Hopefully, people